In the 1600s, Europe executed people for the thoughts inside their heads. You didn't have to commit a violent crime to be hunted down. You simply had to read the wrong book or pray to the wrong version of God. During the 30 Years' War, entire cities were wiped off the map over ideological differences. The monarchs and religious leaders of the time operated on a terrifyingly simple logic. If the population didn't share a single unified belief system, the nation would collapse. To survive, governments enforced purity. They built massive censorship networks, took absolute control over the churches, and actively hunted down philosophers who dared to question the established order. Intolerance was a cold, calculated strategy. Rulers purged diversity because they believed it was the only reliable way to keep their societies intact. Then, right in the middle of this continental panic, the Dutch Republic tried the exact opposite approach. They let people think freely. Look at where they were located. They were a tiny fraction of land surrounded by massive, hostile empires. It is tempting to look back and assume the Dutch were naturally enlightened or possessed some superior moral compass. They didn't. They embraced free thought because religious persecution had already pushed them to the brink of annihilation. They needed a radical new survival strategy, and they found it in an open door. Almost overnight, Amsterdam turned into the escape hatch for the continent. Spanish Jews fleeing the Inquisition set up their own synagogues. French Protestants crossed the borders to find safety, and the Pilgrims lived here before they ever thought of sailing to America. As rulers purged their populations, skilled refugees and wealth fled across Europe, pooling into a dense cluster in the Netherlands. Concentrating human capital, merchants, thinkers, laborers, makes the economy explode. The Dutch built global trade dominance on the backs of Europe's outcasts. Free speech also became its own industry. If a philosopher like Descartes or Spinoza wrote something too dangerous for the French or Spanish courts, they published it here. The physical printing presses multiplied, pushing ideas out faster than foreign kings could ban them. By monetizing peace, the Dutch proved a controversial economic theory. Hoarding the people everyone else hated was the most profitable strategy on earth. But there is a heavy caveat to this story. The 17th century Dutch Republic was nowhere near a modern democracy of equals. Catholics and other minorities were forbidden from worshiping in public. They built elaborate hidden churches tucked tightly inside the wooden attics of ordinary canal houses. Minorities were also systematically locked out of public office. You could live there safely, but you could not rule. The government's formula was entirely pragmatic. They tolerated differences up to the exact point where it maintained state stability and protected their wealth. It was never about true equality. Fast forward 400 years, and the cyclical nature of history has brought the country right back to where it started. Today, the Netherlands is gripped by intense, familiar debates. Citizens are fighting over immigration, identity politics, free speech, and exactly who belongs inside their borders. The historical challenge of welcoming refugees has transformed into a modern struggle to integrate diverse religious structures, like the Western Mosque, into the traditional Dutch landscape. The country constructed by people fleeing persecution is now fiercely debating how much openness it can physically and culturally sustain. It turns out that tolerance is not a default human setting. It is an artificial, highly fragile compromise that requires constant maintenance. The original Dutch Republic didn't invent that compromise because they were idealists. They invented it because they knew exactly what unchecked violence does to a society. The danger of living in an open society is that, over the centuries, people forget the bloodshed that made those rules necessary. History's greatest freedoms are almost always born from a period of profound fear. When a society forgets that fear, it risks losing the freedom entirely.